Well, thank you for spending your evening with us at Q Talks. My name is Joel, and in these 15 minutes, I think I want to give you an interesting perspective on neighborhoods in Chicago that you can think about on your way home and as you travel around this weekend. Okay, so here's setting the stage by telling you about myself. It's finals week at Quinlan, and as an economist, I taught Econ 201. This diagram is one of the things that was on the test. So I would say that what I'm testing here is the students' knowledge of how consumers and producers interact in the market setting to determine the number of goods produced. When I do my research, I kind of take this toolbox and I apply it to a more unconventional set, but an important set of social behavior. So I study intergenerational mobility, I study parenting behavior, and the impacts of neighborhoods. So Maciek has covered most of this, but I'm going to use the idea of residential neighborhoods as a launching point for my talk. Okay, left side of the screen. This is a map of Chicago based on the 2020 census. Every dot you see on the map is 150 people, and the colors tell you people of different races. So without getting into too much detail here, I would say that how I would summarize this picture of the city I live in. My experience of Chicago has been one of lots of diversity, lots of different cultural experiences, but if I look at the picture of where we live, it looks like a picture of segregation. We see big swaths of areas that are predominantly one color, and this is especially pronounced for black families as well as for Hispanic families. Those are the yellow and the red dots respectively. So based on this, I would say that one of the disparities that exists in our city is just who our neighbors are. If you're someone from different racial background, I could do this for economic background as well, you're going to have very different neighbors. What's not on the picture is that the physical circumstances you live in, the condition of your neighborhood, the economic conditions are going to be very different as well. This is not unique to Chicago. This is, I guess, a fact of life about living in US cities. There's a persistent characteristic of residential segregation. This characteristic has lots of consequences. Neighborhoods add up. So we can think about many outcomes, but I think the most striking one that I want to highlight is life expectancy. All of these are census tracts. That's just a fancy name for neighborhoods used by the census. Here's a neighborhood in Gold Coast. I think this might be where our business school is located. I'm not exactly sure. If you live here, your life expectancy is 83 years. If you drive 10 minutes west, you're on the outskirts of Garfield Park, your life expectancy is 70 years. So this is a research finding that has made, I think, the popular press, and this might not be news to some of you. But I think this really highlights the kind of disparities that exist within our city. It's a 10-minute drive, a 13-year disparity in life expectancy. So I think I really like where Cedric kind of ended his talk with looking at a very big problem and trying to break down into manageable steps. Because I think this is what I want to do in this talk as well. I want to give you a little bit of information on how we go from disparities in where we live, how it all adds up into long-run outcomes, like life expectancy. It's a big journey and there's a lot in between. So I want to try to unpack this a little bit, tell you what's going on, what are some of the disparities in the lived experiences of residents in different neighborhoods in Chicago. So I think breaking down the problem this way, if you're interested in policy, it gives you an idea about what you might do as a government or as a community to try to reduce the disparities in the long-run outcomes based on what you see in the lived experiences. But I think maybe more fundamentally, if we internalize Quinlan's mission to do well and do good, I think we need to know what are people in our city experiencing before we know what's good for them. So what I'm going to do is use some quantitative data. We're using big samples, and I'm going to try to tell you about the lived experiences of residents of Chicago. The data that economists use has to do with your cell phones. The first wave of research leveraged check-in apps. So Foursquare or Yelp. Where do you go based on where we see you check in? So just picking Yelp reviews, we get a picture of where we eat based on where we live. And the research team led by Dingle et al. Came up with these following answers. They found that distance matters. So if you are living in very different areas, where you eat and the people you dine with are going to be different as well. So that chart on the left is just telling you that if you look at the distribution of Yelp reviews, those lie a lot closer to the homes of the Yelp reviewers than the restaurants that were not reviewed. Right? Yelp reviewers care about going to restaurants that are close to home. There's more nuance to this picture. We go to what's close to work as well. So it's not just about where we live, but maybe also about where we work. And we're starting to get more of a detailed picture. Finally, the demographics of the neighborhood matter as well. Even if the restaurant is the same, the people in the neighborhood around you, what they look like, that affects whether or not you want to go to a restaurant and check in. So I would say that if you're prejudice and stigma, it's all going to show up here as well. I think the researchers do a lot more than I can cover in this talk. I don't think any of these findings will be extremely startling to any of you, but I want to give you a flavor of what this data can be used for. Researchers can quantify how big each of these factors is in determining decisions of where we like to go. And they can also think about what would happen if there were certain kinds of social change, what would we expect in these patterns. Now I'm going to move to the more recent wave of research that has kind of bypassed the need to look at check-in apps and just goes straight to the cell phone tower. Based on the pings of your cell phone, the cell phone tower can track where you are. Now, there could be a whole separate talk about how much of this should be available to researchers like myself. I don't want to touch that topic, okay? But I want to let you know that there is data out there that's tracking locations based on pings to cell phone towers. They aggregate it and anonymize it so it's no longer one person's record of exactly where they are. But even with this level of privacy, it's really useful for researchers who want to understand what does segregation in residential location mean in terms of where we go, who we interact with. So this is a picture. By the way, I'm drawing mainly on other people's research. I'll sprinkle in a little bit of mine, but there's some really good work out there that I want to share with you that's been done by other researchers. What we can do using this data, we can look at individual places, establishments like the Chicago History Museum or a bar down the street. And we can think about whether the visitors to that place are a representative slice of Chicago or whether they are all from one end of the distribution, either rich or poor. So this is our map of Chicago. All of these you can think of as the lit up establishments. Those that are lit up blue are very equal. You're getting a slice of Chicago everywhere when you go into this place. Okay, where are these places? I see a lot of them downtown. O'Hare is actually a quite egalitarian place to visit, right? What's not so equal? A lot of the commercial corridors, especially those in minority neighborhoods on the west and south sides of downtown. That's where we're seeing a lot of the inequality in where in who we, our fellow customers, our fellow patrons, fellow diners. This picture comes from the Atlas for Inequality. You can look it up on your phones or later on your computers. In an attached research article, the researchers do a lot more. One of the interesting things I saw was that if you want to visit establishments that tend to be really egalitarian, where do you want to go, right? You want to go to ramen places. So ramen noodle stores tend to be really, you get everyone, right? Another thing maybe of interest is that exhibits and museums are also places with lots of equality. And maybe that would make you think about municipal works like the Chicago History Museum a little bit differently. Okay, so this is the one in these few slides, this is some work and analysis that I've done for this presentation. What I'm trying to do here is add up this picture of inequality across places of visit. Thank you. I'm trying to add this up and look at inequality across where we live. I'm looking at inequality in terms of where we visit. Let's say this is a rich neighborhood. Rich neighborhoods, people from rich neighborhoods tend to go to these 3 neighborhoods. What about someone from a poorer neighborhood? Well, maybe they go to one of the neighborhoods that the rich person goes to, but then they go to a different set of neighborhoods. I want to see, are these 2 sets really equal or are they really unequal? Okay, so I thought about how to summarize it, and I decided I would just use a ranking method. If we think about residential segregation, the headline number, or the headline figure in news, Chicago isn't a very segregated city. Neighborhood income segregation, we're in the top 50, but we're well outside the top 10 of cities around the US. If we think about this kind of inequality in where we tend to go, Chicago shoots up the rankings. Chicago's actually within the top 10. I have them at number 8 out of all large US cities. And I think this kind of sobering fact does kind of tell us there is something to be studied here and some ways to go to really get diversity in Chicago. Where I see a lot of this inequality coming from, I'm kind of observing this pattern. Our weekday visits, we tend to go to these really egalitarian places because on the weekdays we're going downtown to work or we're going to O'Hare to fly somewhere else. Our weekend visits are a lot more segregated because on the weekends, maybe we tend to stay around home. We tend to go to places we're more familiar with or more comfortable in. And some of that comfort translates to being around people who are just very, very similar to us. Okay, I have 3 minutes to go, and I think in these 3 minutes, I want to give you I want to tie in something about the physical characteristics of the neighborhood. It was great that Cedric was talking about fossil fuels and divestment, because I want to look at neighborhood exposure to PM 2.5. These are a class of small particles very often created by combustion. Within a city like Chicago, you might think there's not a lot of difference in the amount of pollution we're exposed to, but I'm going to show you that there is. This is some work that came out, I want to say 2 weeks ago by a researcher named Noli Brazil, and I think this is great. He's characterized all sorts of gaps across races, across poor and non-poor. In the interest of time, I'm just going to look at the black-white race gap in terms of environmental exposure to pollutants. Within cities, we're seeing that there's inequality based on where you live in terms of the amount of harmful particles that you're exposed to that come from the burning of fossil fuels and other combustion. So we are seeing inequality in exposure just from where you live. If we expand your radius a little bit more, look at the surrounding neighborhoods, we're still seeing the same black-white gap. And I think here is the kicker where we're able to use integrate the cell phone data. Even if we think about the commonly visited destinations by white residents and by black residents, we're seeing essentially the same gap in exposure to pollutants. So whether you're staying home or you're going to where you usually go on your daily commute, that racial gap is being maintained. This makes me think, to wrap up, this makes me think that there are many policies around that we don't think of as connected to inequality, but they are. Something like reducing the amount of pollutants that we're exposed to. If we're targeting the areas that are heaviest hit, it is going to have an impact on racial disparities. So to wrap up, Ed Glazer is a famous urban economist. In 2011, he wrote a book about the triumph of the city. So this is how cities have boosted productivity, boosted the happiness for people around the world. 10 years later, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and this is what Ed Glazer writes with a co-author this time. He's calling it survival of the city. I would say that he's not really retracting anything he wrote in that book. That book was about the strength. This book is about about the threats and the weaknesses. And leading, the leading keyword among these threats and weaknesses is the word disparities. We're faced with lots of disparities. Living in the same city, we've got really different experiences. And that is what Ed Glazer thinks is the challenge for us to overcome in the next few years. Thank you very much.